My daughter texted. I took the lake house and his watch. Goodbye. She tried to disappear, so I didn't let her. Eleanor woke up that morning the same way she had for years, slowly and with a quiet heaviness in her chest. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only comes when you live alone long enough to get used to it. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time that no longer felt urgent. She sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes, already feeling tired even though the day had just begun. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. She had dreamed of her husband again. In the dream, he was standing by the lake, sleeves rolled up, smiling the way he used to when he thought no one was watching. She could almost hear his laugh when she woke up. That always made mornings harder. She stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, letting the memory fade on its own. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound startled her. Hardly anyone texted her anymore. Most mornings passed without a single message. For a brief moment, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe it was her daughter. Maybe she was checking in. Maybe today would be different. Eleanor reached for the phone and squinted at the screen. The message was short. Very short. I sold the lake house and Dad's watch. Bye. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. No apology. Eleanor stared at the words, not fully understanding them at first. Her mind read the sentence again and again, but it didn't settle. It felt like reading a language she didn't know, even though every word was clear. Her hands began to shake. She sat up straighter, holding the phone closer to her face as if the message might change if she looked harder. It didn't. The lake house. Her husband's watch. Those weren't just things. They were pieces of her life. Anchors. Proof that the past had been real and not something her mind had slowly made up out of loneliness. She whispered, "No," to the empty room. Her heart started to race. She felt lightheaded, like the room was tilting slightly to one side. Eleanor put her feet on the floor, trying to ground herself. The wood was cold under her toes. That helped a little. She told herself there had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a joke. A cruel joke, but still a joke. Her daughter had always had a sharp edge to her humor. Maybe she would text back any second with a correction. Eleanor waited. Nothing came. She read the message again, slower this time. The word sold hit her the hardest. Sold meant paperwork. It meant signatures. It meant time and planning. This wasn't something done by accident. Panic crept in, quiet at first, then loud and overwhelming. She stood up too fast and had to grab the dresser to steady herself. Her chest felt tight, like someone was pressing a heavy hand against it. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each breath the way her doctor had once taught her. After a moment, she moved to the kitchen, phone still in her hand. The morning light streamed through the window, bright and almost cheerful. It felt wrong, like the world hadn't gotten the message that something terrible had just happened. She poured herself a glass of water but didn't drink it right away. Her thoughts were spinning. The lake house had been in the family for decades. Summers there were the best memories she had. Early mornings with coffee on the dock. Afternoons with laughter echoing across the water. Even after her husband passed, going there made her feel close to him, like he had just stepped inside for a moment and would be back soon. And the watch. Her husband had worn it every day. He got it years before he was sick, back when his hands were steady and his smile came easily. After he died, Eleanor kept the watch in a small wooden box in her bedroom. She didn't wear it. She just liked knowing it was there. Her daughter knew all of this. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the glass until she realized she might drop it. She set it down carefully on the counter. "No," she said again, louder this time. She unlocked her phone and opened her call log. She pressed her daughter's name. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Eleanor tried again immediately, her thumb moving without thought. Straight to voicemail this time. Her throat felt dry. She swallowed hard and tried once more. The same result. Please, she whispered to the phone. Pick up. She left a message, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound calm. She asked what was going on. She said there must be a misunderstanding. She said they needed to talk. When she hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. Eleanor sank into a chair at the kitchen table. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out if she tried to stand again. She placed both hands flat on the table and closed her eyes. Images rushed in without permission. Her husband sitting at that same table, reading the newspaper. His watch catching the light as he turned the pages. The way he used to reach for her hand without looking. Her chest ached. The grief she thought she had learned to live with came back fresh and sharp. Losing him had already felt like having the ground pulled out from under her. Now it felt like someone was taking what little solid ground she had left. She opened her eyes and looked around the kitchen. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday. The same curtains. The same framed photos on the wall. But something had shifted inside her. Something had broken. Eleanor stood and walked to her bedroom. She opened the drawer where the wooden box was kept. Her hands moved slowly, as if she were afraid of what she would find. The box was gone. Her breath caught in her throat. She pulled the drawer all the way out, even though she knew it wouldn't help. She checked the closet. The nightstand. Every place she could think of. The box wasn't there. Her knees buckled, and she had to sit on the edge of the bed. The truth settled in, heavy and unavoidable. This was real. She picked up her phone again and opened her email. Her fingers hovered over the screen, then began to scroll. There were messages she hadn't noticed before. Notifications from a real estate office. Automated confirmations. Documents she didn't remember signing. Her heart pounded as she opened one. The lake house address was right there in black and white. Sold. A date. A price. Eleanor's vision blurred. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, but more came. She wasn't just hurt. She was scared. She scrolled through more messages, each one confirming the same thing. The sale had gone through. The money had been transferred. Everything was finished. There was no mistake. She felt foolish for ever thinking there might be. Her daughter hadn't asked. Hadn't warned her. Hadn't even explained. She had simply taken what mattered most and walked away. Eleanor tried calling again. And again. Each attempt ended the same way. Her voice grew quieter with every voicemail she left, until she stopped leaving messages at all. She sat there for a long time, phone in her lap, staring at nothing. Her mind went back over the years, searching for signs she might have missed. The arguments. The long silences. The way her daughter had grown distant after her father's death. Eleanor had told herself it was grief. That everyone handled loss differently. Had she been wrong? Maybe the distance hadn't been grief at all. Maybe it had been something colder. Something final. The word, bye, echoed in her head. Not, we'll talk later. Not, I'm sorry. Just, bye. It felt like a door slamming shut. Eleanor hugged her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. She had never felt so alone. Friends had drifted away over the years. Family gatherings had grown smaller. Her daughter had been the one constant she believed she still had. Now even that was gone. She walked to the window and looked outside. The neighborhood was waking up. Cars passed by. A dog barked in the distance. Life was moving forward like nothing had happened. But for Eleanor, everything had changed. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. A deep, painful understanding settled over her. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake made in anger or confusion. She had been deliberately left behind. The betrayal wasn't just complete. It was intentional. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She lay in bed with her eyes open, staring into the dark, listening to every sound the house made. The quiet felt loud now. Every creak of wood and hum of the refrigerator seemed to remind her that she was alone. Her mind would not stop moving. It kept going back, digging through memories she had pushed aside for years. Moments she had explained away. Words she had forgiven too quickly. Silences she had accepted because it felt easier than questioning them. By morning, her head hurt and her chest felt heavy. She made herself a cup of tea but forgot to drink it. Instead, she sat at the table and stared at the steam rising from the mug. Her thoughts drifted backward, slowly at first, then faster, like a film playing scenes she could no longer pause. She remembered the first time something felt off. It was after her husband's funeral. Eleanor had been exhausted, numb, barely able to think straight. Her daughter had stayed with her for a few weeks, helping around the house. At the time, Eleanor had been grateful. She had told everyone how lucky she was. But now, looking back, she remembered the sharp comments. How her daughter complained about how much everything cost. The way she talked about the lake house like it was already hers. "You don't even go there much anymore," she had said once, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "It just sits there." Eleanor had felt a sting then, but she brushed it off. Grief made people say strange things, she told herself. Another memory surfaced. A holiday dinner, a year later. Eleanor had mentioned wanting to keep the lake house exactly the way it was. Her daughter had laughed, not kindly. "That place is outdated," she had said. "You're being sentimental." Eleanor remembered feeling embarrassed, as if she had said something childish. She had changed the subject instead of speaking up. There were other moments too. Requests for money that came with pressure. Questions about her accounts that felt too detailed. Comments about how Eleanor would need help managing things as she got older. Each time, Eleanor told herself it came from concern. She had wanted to believe that. The truth felt uglier now. Eleanor stood and walked to the living room, her movements slow and stiff. She picked up a photo frame from the shelf. It showed her, her husband, and her daughter at the lake, years ago. Everyone looked happy, carefree. She traced her finger along the glass. When had it changed? Her thoughts shifted to the year she got sick. The surgery. The long recovery. The pain medication that made days blur together. She remembered feeling weak, embarrassed by how much help she needed. Her daughter had stepped in quickly then. Took charge. Made calls. Organized paperwork. "You should rest," she had said. "I'll handle it." Eleanor had been relieved. She remembered signing papers without fully reading them. Her daughter had explained them in simple terms. Medical forms. Insurance. Temporary permissions. "It's just in case," she had said. "So I can help if you're not up to it." Eleanor trusted her. Why wouldn't she? Now her stomach twisted as she opened her laptop and began searching through old files and emails. It took time. Her hands shook, and she had to stop often to steady herself. Finally, she found it. A document dated during her recovery. Power of attorney. Her name was there. Her signature. And her daughter's name listed clearly underneath. Eleanor felt cold. She read the document slowly, forcing herself to understand what it meant. The words felt heavy, serious, final. It granted broad access. Financial access. Property access. Her trust had not just been emotional. It had been legal. A sharp wave of regret washed over her. She remembered how tired she had been back then. How desperate she had felt to lean on someone else for a while. How badly she had wanted to believe her daughter was protecting her. Tears slid down her face, but she did not wipe them away. She kept reading. Her daughter had not stolen access. It had been given. Eleanor closed the laptop and sat back, staring at the wall. The house felt different now. Less safe. Like she had invited someone in who never planned to leave anything behind. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her flinch. Her heart jumped before sinking again. It was not her daughter. Just a bank notification she hadn't noticed before. She opened it. Her breath caught. The balance was lower than it should have been. Much lower. At first, she thought it might be a delay or error. She refreshed the screen. The number stayed the same. Her fingers felt numb as she tapped into the account details. Transaction after transaction appeared. Transfers. Withdrawals. Large ones. All recent. All authorized. Eleanor's chest tightened. She scrolled faster, her eyes struggling to keep up. The account she shared with her daughter, the one she had kept for emergencies, was nearly empty. She whispered, "No," again, but the word felt small and useless. She checked another account. The same. Her savings, built carefully over decades, reduced to a fraction of what it had been. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, her head in her hands. The room spun slightly. She focused on breathing, slow and steady, just like before. This wasn't just about the lake house anymore. This was about everything. Every small warning she had ignored lined up in her mind, forming a clear picture she no longer wanted to deny. The impatience. The resentment. The way money always came up in conversation. The quiet control masked as help. Eleanor felt foolish. Not because she had trusted, but because she had refused to question that trust when something inside her had whispered that she should. She thought of all the times she had defended her daughter to friends. "She's just stressed. She means well. She'd never hurt me." The words tasted bitter now. She opened her email again and searched for messages she had once skipped over. There were confirmations she hadn't read closely. Notices she had assumed were routine. Her daughter had been busy. Careful. Prepared. Eleanor felt anger begin to rise, slow and unfamiliar. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was heavy and deep, settling into her bones. This hadn't happened overnight. It had been built. Brick by brick. Years of silence. Years of small dismissals. Years of Eleanor choosing peace over confrontation. She stood and walked through the house, noticing details she had stopped seeing. The empty drawer. The missing papers. The quiet spaces where trust used to live. She stopped in the hallway and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face looked older than she remembered. Tired. But there was something else there too. Clarity. For the first time, she stopped asking why this had happened. She already knew. She had trusted the wrong person. And that trust had given her daughter everything she needed to take it all. Eleanor returned to the table and sat down slowly. Her hands no longer shook as badly. The shock was still there, but beneath it was something steadier. Understanding. The betrayal had not been sudden. It had been growing quietly for years. Eleanor sat in the waiting room with her hands folded tightly in her lap. The chair was firm and uncomfortable, but she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the sound of voices behind a closed door. Every now and then, papers shuffled. A phone rang softly. The place smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She had imagined this moment many times on the drive over. In her mind, it always ended the same way. The lawyer would shake their head, say it was clearly wrong, clearly illegal, and that everything could be fixed quickly. She clung to that thought like a lifeline. When her name was called, she stood too quickly and felt a brief wave of dizziness. She steadied herself and followed the assistant down a short hallway into a quiet office. The lawyer greeted her politely and motioned for her to sit. Eleanor noticed the neat desk, the orderly stacks of files, the calm expression. Everything about the room felt controlled and measured. It made her nervous. She explained what had happened, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier as the story spilled out. The text. The lake house. The watch. The emptied accounts. She spoke faster near the end, afraid she might run out of time or courage. The lawyer listened without interrupting, taking notes as Eleanor talked. When she finished, the room fell quiet. Eleanor waited for the words she wanted to hear. Instead, The lawyer leaned back slightly and sighed. "I'm very sorry," they said gently. "This is incredibly painful." Eleanor nodded, gripping the edge of the chair. "But," the lawyer continued, "based on what you've told me so far, the transactions themselves appear to be legally valid." The words landed hard. "What?" Eleanor asked. But she had no right. The lawyer turned the screen slightly and pulled up a document Eleanor recognized immediately. "The power of attorney," they said. This gave her authority. Broad authority. Eleanor felt her chest tighten again. She had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. "So there's nothing I can do?" she asked quietly. The lawyer held up a hand. "Not exactly. But it's important to understand the difference between what feels wrong and what the law sees as wrong." They explained slowly, carefully choosing their words. Eleanor listened, even when every part of her wanted to argue. The sales had followed procedure. The documents were signed. The transfers were authorized. On paper, everything looked clean. Eleanor felt a hollow ache settle in her stomach. "So she just gets away with it," she said. "Legally," the lawyer said, "she used the authority you gave her. Ethically is another matter." That word stuck with Eleanor. Ethically. The lawyer continued, "That doesn't mean this is the end of the road. It just means we have to be realistic about the path forward." Eleanor swallowed and nodded. She forced herself to keep listening. They moved on to the lake house. The lawyer pulled up recent sales in the area. Eleanor leaned forward as numbers filled the screen. "This," the lawyer said, pointing, "is where things start to look unusual." The lake house had sold for far less than similar properties nearby. Much less. Eleanor felt a spark of something stir inside her. "That's not what it's worth," she said. "No," the lawyer agreed. "Not even close." They explained that selling below market value was not illegal by itself. Owners could sell property for whatever price they chose. But, the lawyer added, when someone with power of attorney does it, especially when they benefit from the sale, it can raise serious questions. Questions. That word felt better than nothing. The lawyer took notes again, asking Eleanor small, precise questions. Had her daughter received the money directly? Was there a clear record of where it went? Had Eleanor ever given verbal permission to sell the property? Eleanor answered honestly. No. 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 They nodded thoughtfully. Then came the watch. Eleanor's throat tightened as she described it. How much it meant. How it wasn't just valuable, but personal. The lawyer made a few calls while Eleanor waited. Each minute felt long and heavy. When they returned, their expression had changed slightly. The watch didn't go through a public auction, they said. It was sold privately. Eleanor felt a chill. To who? She asked. A private collector, the lawyer said. Someone who specializes in rare pieces. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. She imagined the watch sitting in a glass case somewhere, admired by strangers who knew nothing about the man who wore it every day. Can I get it back? She asked. That will be difficult, the lawyer said carefully. If the buyer acted in good faith, they may be protected. The words felt cold and distant. Good faith. Her daughter had acted in good faith, according to the paperwork. The buyer had acted in good faith too. Where did that leave her? Eleanor felt the familiar wave of helplessness rise again. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them still. I trusted her, she said softly. The lawyer nodded. And the law doesn't always protect people from broken trust. Silence filled the room again. Eleanor stared at the desk, at the smooth surface where nothing personal was allowed to stay for long. She felt small, tired. For a brief moment, she wanted to give up. To go home and accept that everything was gone. That fighting would only make things hurt longer. But then the lawyer leaned forward. That said, they began. There are still options. Eleanor looked up. They explained that while reversing the sales outright would be hard, There were ways to challenge how the authority had been used. Whether her daughter had acted in Eleanor's best interest. Whether there had been self-dealing. Whether funds had been misused. These cases are slow, the lawyer said. And they're not simple. How slow? Eleanor asked. Months. Possibly years. The word years echoed in her mind. And expensive, the lawyer added gently. Eleanor nodded. She had expected that. But, the lawyer said, documentation matters. Patterns matter. And intent matters. They explained how selling assets far below value could suggest bad intent. How emptying accounts could strengthen a claim. How the power of attorney could be reviewed, even limited, going forward. Eleanor listened closely now, every word sinking in. This isn't about revenge, the lawyer said. It's about accountability. That word felt solid. Accountability. The lawyer laid out a careful plan. Gathering records. Freezing remaining accounts. Filing formal notices. Taking steps that wouldn't bring instant relief, but would stop further damage. Eleanor asked questions. More than she thought she would. Her voice grew steadier with each one. By the time the meeting ended, she felt drained but clearer. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the air. The world still moved at the same pace. Cars passed. People laughed nearby. Nothing had magically been fixed. But something had changed. She understood now that the law wasn't a hammer that could smash everything back into place. It was a tool. Slow. Complicated. Limited. But still a tool. Eleanor walked to her car with careful steps. Her heart still ached. The losses were real. The damage was done. Yet beneath the grief and anger, something new had taken shape. Resolve. Justice would not come quickly. It would not come easily. But for the first time since that text message, Eleanor believed it was still possible. Eleanor did not rush into anything after meeting the lawyer. That surprised even her. In the past, she had always acted quickly when emotions ran high. This time, she slowed herself down. She told herself that panic had already cost her enough. Instead of calling or sending messages she would regret, she began paying attention. Quietly. Carefully. She treated every new piece of information like something fragile that could break if handled too roughly. It started with paperwork. She sat at her kitchen table each morning with a notebook and her laptop, going through old emails, bank notices, and legal documents. At first, it felt overwhelming. Dates blurred together. Numbers swam in front of her eyes. But after a few days, patterns began to form. Transfers that didn't make sense. Emails forwarded to unfamiliar addresses. Receipts that listed locations Eleanor had never visited. She wrote everything down. One afternoon, she noticed a charge that stood out. An airline ticket. One way. The destination wasn't somewhere Eleanor expected. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her daughter hadn't just left town. She had left the country. Eleanor felt a sharp twist in her stomach, but she didn't stop. She followed the trail further. Hotel bookings. Temporary rentals. Each one placed her daughter somewhere new, never staying long. Running. Eleanor thought of the word and nodded to herself. She checked timestamps and dates, lining them up carefully. Her daughter had moved quickly after selling the lake house. Too quickly for someone acting without a plan. This had been prepared. Late one night, Eleanor came across something she almost missed. A transfer labeled in a way she didn't recognize. It wasn't a normal bank movement. The numbers were strange. The language unfamiliar. She searched it online. Cryptocurrency. Her heart sank. She didn't fully understand how it worked, but she understood enough to know what it meant. Money that was harder to track. Easier to move. Easier to hide. Eleanor leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Her daughter had thought this through. Still, Eleanor kept going. She remembered something the lawyer had said about documentation and intent. About patterns. So she followed patterns. She noticed changes in how her daughter signed documents. Slight variations in spelling. Different email addresses. Names that looked similar but weren't exactly the same. Aliases. The realization made Eleanor's skin prickle. This wasn't just escape. It was reinvention. More than once, Eleanor felt the urge to pick up the phone and demand answers. The words formed easily in her mind. Anger made them sharp and satisfying. But she resisted. Confrontation would only warn her daughter. Eleanor understood that now. Instead, she worked quietly. She saved screenshots. Printed copies. Backed everything up twice. She kept her notebook close, filling its pages with dates, amounts, and locations. Each small discovery added weight. Each piece gave her more leverage. One evening, while reviewing travel records, Eleanor noticed a pattern that made her pause. The destinations were changing less frequently. The stays were getting longer. Her daughter was slowing down. She zoomed in on the most recent booking. A long-term rental. 6 months, with an option to extend. Eleanor's breath caught. This wasn't temporary. She looked up the location. It was far from home, far from anyone Eleanor knew. A place with warm weather and loose regulations. A place people went when they wanted to disappear quietly. Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. For weeks, she had been chasing shadows. Now, the shadows had a shape. She double-checked everything. Dates. Names. Payment methods. Each detail confirmed the same conclusion. Her daughter was planning to stay. Eleanor closed the laptop slowly and sat in silence. The house felt different again, but this time not in a hollow way. This time, it felt focused. She wasn't ready to act. Not yet. But she knew something she hadn't known before. She knew where the escape led. And for the first time, Eleanor wasn't just reacting. She was preparing. Eleanor waited before making her first move. Not because she was unsure, but because timing mattered now. Everything she had learned pointed to one truth. Rushing would only undo the quiet work she had done. So she chose calm. Her first call was not to her daughter. It was to the buyer of the lake house. She rehearsed what she would say, not in anger, but in clarity. When the call connected, her voice surprised even herself. It was steady, polite, almost gentle. She explained who she was. She explained her connection to the property. She did not accuse. She simply asked if the buyer had been informed about certain legal complications. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What complications? The buyer asked. Eleanor listed them carefully. The power of attorney. The unusually low sale price. The lack of independent confirmation that the sale reflected her wishes. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She informed. By the end of the call, the tone had changed. The buyer was no longer confident. Questions replaced certainty. Eleanor thanked them for their time and ended the call. She sat quietly for a moment, then wrote everything down. Next came the paperwork. With the lawyer's guidance, Eleanor filed civil challenges questioning how the authority had been used. The language was formal and precise. It did not demand immediate reversal. It requested review. And while the review moved forward, something important happened. The proceeds were flagged. Accounts connected to the sale were temporarily frozen, not seized, but held in place. Nothing could move without scrutiny. Eleanor felt no rush of victory. Only relief. She moved on to the watch. This part hurt more. She contacted antique dealers and collectors quietly, providing documentation that showed the watch's history and the circumstances of its sale. She didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. She asked them to be cautious. Word travels fast in those circles. Provenance matters. Doubt spreads quickly when questions are raised. Eleanor knew she might never hold the watch again. But she also knew its value, both personal and financial, was no longer clean and simple. Then she waited. While Eleanor spent her days organizing documents and responding to measured emails, her daughter was doing something very different. Through the trails Eleanor still monitored, she saw it clearly. Money moving fast. Expensive purchases. Short stays. Big plans. Confidence. Her daughter believed the escape had worked. Eleanor said nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. One afternoon, Eleanor received a notification. A small one, easy to miss if she hadn't been paying attention. A transaction failed. She felt her pulse quicken, but she stayed seated. More notifications followed. Transfers pending. Access restricted. Eleanor imagined the moment on the other side of the world. Her daughter opening her phone. Refreshing an app. Trying again. Nothing moving. For the first time, the silence was not Eleanor's burden alone. She didn't celebrate. She closed her notebook and rested her hands on it, feeling the worn cover beneath her fingers. This was not the end. But it was the shift. The escape that had seemed so clean, so final, was starting to close in on itself. And Eleanor, once left behind without a word, was no longer chasing. She was standing still. And everything else was finally being forced to stop. The call came late in the evening. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table, her notebook closed, a glass of water beside her. She wasn't surprised when the phone rang. She had been expecting it, though she didn't know exactly when it would happen. She looked at the screen. Her daughter's name. Eleanor did not rush to answer. She let the phone ring twice, then 3 times. Not as punishment. Just to remind herself to breathe. When she finally picked up, she spoke calmly. "Hello." The voice on the other end was sharp and shaking all at once. "What did you do?" her daughter demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Eleanor listened. The words came fast. Accusations piled on top of each other. Claims of betrayal. Of control. Of manipulation. "You always treated me like I couldn't handle things," her daughter said. "You trusted everyone else more than me. You always made everything about him." Eleanor stayed quiet. "You never saw me," her daughter continued. "You never listened. And now you're trying to ruin my life because you can't let go." The anger was loud, but beneath it Eleanor heard something else. Fear. She waited until the words slowed, until there was a pause long enough to step into without interrupting. "I hear that you're upset," Eleanor said. Her daughter scoffed. "Upset? You froze my money. You turned people against me. You're punishing me." Eleanor took a breath. "I didn't punish you," she said. "I protected what was mine. That was my inheritance," her daughter snapped. "No," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "It was my life." Silence followed. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. Eleanor continued, choosing each word carefully. "I loved you," she said. "That's why I trusted you. That's why I signed those papers. Not because you earned control, but because I believed you cared." Her daughter laughed bitterly. "So now you're the victim." Eleanor didn't react. "I'm not a victim," she said. "I'm a person who was wronged. There's a difference." Her daughter's voice cracked. "You're doing this on purpose. You want me to suffer." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "No," she said. "I want you to understand." She explained slowly. "Not the legal steps. Not the documents. The meaning. You took without asking. You sold things you knew mattered to me. You hid money and disappeared. Those were choices." Her daughter interrupted, trying to argue, but Eleanor spoke on. "Consequences are not cruelty," she said. "They're what happens when choices harm someone else." The line was quiet again. For the first time, her daughter didn't immediately respond. "You're serious," her daughter said finally. "Yes," Eleanor replied. You're really going to do this, her daughter said. I already am, Eleanor answered. There was no anger in her voice. No shaking. No pleading. Only certainty. Her daughter exhaled sharply. You'll regret this. Eleanor shook her head, though her daughter couldn't see it. I regretted trusting you blindly, she said. I won't regret protecting myself. Another long pause. When her daughter spoke again, her tone had changed. The rage was still there, but it was thinner now. Weaker. This isn't over, she said. Eleanor nodded slowly. I know, she replied. That's why I'm prepared. The call ended soon after. No goodbye. No closure. Eleanor set the phone down gently and sat back in her chair. Her hands were steady. Her heart still ached, but it no longer ruled her. She had spoken without shouting. She had listened without surrendering. For the first time, love was no longer being used as a shield against harm. And her daughter knew it. That was the difference now. The weeks that followed were heavy and slow. Nothing dramatic happened all at once. There were no sudden victories or clean endings. Instead, consequences arrived the way real ones usually do, quietly, piece by piece. Rachel felt them first. The legal pressure began to tighten. Letters arrived where confidence used to live. Deadlines replaced freedom. Questions followed her everywhere, from banks to offices to people she once believed were safely distant. Some stopped answering her calls. Others answered, but differently. The charm that once smoothed things over no longer worked the same way. Stories didn't line up. Explanations sounded thinner each time they were repeated. Eleanor did not watch closely. She didn't need to. Updates came through her lawyer in short, careful messages. Each one confirmed what Eleanor already understood. This was the cost. Not punishment. Accountability. One afternoon, Eleanor received a call she hadn't expected. It was about the watch. Her breath caught when she heard the words. It's been located. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The watch had changed hands more than once. Questions had been raised. Doubt had spread. Eventually, someone decided it was safer to return it than hold on to it. When Eleanor finally saw it again, her hands trembled. The watch was real. The weight was familiar. But it wasn't the same. The glass was scratched. The band was worn in places it never had been before. Time had moved through it without care. Eleanor closed her fingers around it anyway. She did not cry. She simply sat with it for a long time, letting the reality settle. Some things could be recovered, but not untouched. The lake house followed a different path. It did not come back. Instead, it entered negotiation. Long, careful discussions about value, responsibility, and misuse of authority. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing felt certain. Eleanor accepted that. She had stopped expecting clean returns. What surprised her was how little satisfaction she felt. There was no triumph. No sense of winning. Only grief. Grief for the house she might never walk through again. Grief for the watch that had lost its quiet dignity. Grief for the relationship that could not be repaired by paperwork or apologies. At night, Eleanor found herself questioning things she had never allowed herself to question before. Had she failed? Had she missed something when her daughter was younger? Had she protected too much? Or not enough? She replayed old moments with a different lens now. Times when she had stepped in too quickly. Times when she had smoothed things over instead of letting discomfort teach its lesson. The questions hurt. But she did not run from them. One evening, Eleanor sat alone with the watch resting on the table beside her. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty in the same way. She thought about the future. About the calls that might still come. The pleas that might follow. The temptation to step in again and soften the blow. She knew herself well enough to know that instinct had not disappeared. But something else had grown stronger. Understanding. Love did not mean rescue. Protection did not mean erasing consequences. Eleanor took a deep breath and made a quiet decision. She would not save Rachel from this. Not this time. Whatever happened next would have to be faced honestly, without Eleanor stepping in to shield the damage. She picked up the watch and placed it back in its box. Not as it once was, but as it now existed. Real. Marked. Accountability had replaced protection. And Eleanor, though grieving, knew she would not undo that choice. The final resolutions did not arrive with celebration. They arrived quietly. A document was signed. A name was corrected. A record was updated. The lake house returned to Eleanor. When her lawyer told her, Eleanor felt a pause inside herself, like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding had finally been released. There was no rush of joy. No sudden relief. Just a steady calm that settled into her chest. It was hers again. Not because she had won, but because the truth had held. The settlement had taken time. Conversations went back and forth. Conditions were agreed upon. Nothing felt simple or clean. But when it ended, Eleanor understood something important. Justice, when it comes slowly, leaves room for clarity. The watch followed a different path. It could not be returned to what it once was. The scratches remained. The metal showed signs of careless hands. But Eleanor took it to a careful professional, someone who treated old things with patience. Piece by piece, it was restored. Not erased. Stabilized. When Eleanor held it again, it felt familiar, but honest. Time had passed through it. Damage had occurred. And still, it worked. She wore it once, just to feel the weight on her wrist. Then she placed it back in its box. Some things were meant to be remembered, not displayed. With the legal matters settled, Eleanor turned to quieter work. She revised her will. She reviewed every document she owned. She adjusted boundaries that had once been loose out of habit and hope. She made decisions slowly, deliberately, without guilt. Trust, she learned, was not something owed. It was something earned. Rachel did not disappear. She remained alive, free, and changed. Their contact was limited now. Polite. Distant. Without illusion. Eleanor no longer searched her voice for regret or understanding. She no longer tried to read between lines that were never meant to hold truth. Rachel had faced consequences. What she did with that was no longer Eleanor's responsibility. One early morning, Eleanor drove to the lake house alone. The road felt familiar, but quieter without company. When she arrived, the water lay still, reflecting the pale sky. The house stood as it always had, marked by years, not ruined by them. Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dust had settled. Time had passed. She opened windows and let the air move through the rooms. She walked slowly, touching the doorframes, the table, the places where memory lived without demanding attention. Later, she sat on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the lake wake up. There was no audience. No victory speech. Just peace. She thought about reconciliation. How often it was treated as the only acceptable ending. She understood now that reconciliation without respect was another form of loss. Love did not require self-erasure. Forgiveness did not require proximity. Eleanor chose herself. Not in anger. Not in bitterness. But with quiet certainty. The lake rippled gently in front of her. The watch rested safely back at home. The future felt open in a way it hadn't for years. What remained was not what had been taken. It was what she had reclaimed. Her name. Her boundaries. Her peace.